Today, we're plunging into a geopolitical narrative that's, well, it's shaping global headlines, a story stretching back thousands of years.
That's right.
It's the simmering, often explosive dynamic between two major players in the Middle East, a relationship so complex it's been called a dance of shifting alliances, deep historical grievances, and strategic realignments. You might think you know this story from the Daily News, but we're going to unpack some truly surprising turns that connect the past to what's happening right now.
Exactly. What we'll explore today isn't just, a recent conflict. It's really a profound historical journey, one that transformed, believe it or not, former allies into fierce adversaries.
Allies.
Yes, and understanding this deep historical foundation is absolutely critical. You really need it to grasp the current landscape of the Middle East and, frankly, its implications for the whole world.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is to give you a shortcut, a way to be truly well-informed.
Connect the dots.
Exactly. Connect the dots in a way that illuminates this really intricate situation and maybe reveal some hidden currents driving these events, the ones you might not expect. Let's begin with Israel. Strategically positioned, isn't it? Right at the crossroads of the Middle East.
Right there on the Mediterranean coast, base of the Arabian Peninsula.
And right there, intricately intertwined, is Palestine, including the West Bank and Gaza.
And it's crucial to understand, while the vast majority of the surrounding region is predominantly Islamic, Israel defines itself as a Jewish state.
Right.
And this fundamental difference in identity and foundational purpose, it's at the core of so much of its history and, well, the conflicts that have shaped the region.
And that history, it runs deep. I mean, we're talking about an ancient Jewish kingdom existing in this very land over 2 millennia ago.
2,000 years.
That kingdom eventually fell, leading to the dispersal of Jewish people across the world, the diaspora.
Diaspora, yes.
And for centuries after that, this land, which came to be known as Palestine, was mostly under various forms of Islamic rule.
Populated mainly by Arab peoples during that long period.
Right.
But what's fascinating here is how, in the late 19th century, a movement known as Zionism started to gain, well, significant traction.
Zionism, okay.
This was a political and ideological call for Jewish people to return to what they considered their ancestral homeland, to reestablish Jewish sovereignty there.
And this led to increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, which was part of the Ottoman Empire then.
Exactly, part of the Ottoman Empire at that time.
So the Ottoman Empire collapses after World War I. Britain steps in.
Yes, Britain takes control under a mandate.
And this is where it gets really crucial, isn't it? Because their diplomacy, well, it kind of laid the groundwork for decades of conflict. They made 2 sets of promises.
2 sets of promises, yes.
Yeah.
Almost contradictory. One was to European Jews, the Balfour Declaration, pledging support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. And the other was to Arab leaders, promising them independence in the broader region if they helped fight the Ottomans.
You can immediately see the tension there, the potential for conflict baked right in.
Absolutely. And that tension was just dramatically exacerbated by events in Europe.
You mean persecution?
Yes. Jewish immigration accelerated significantly. Persecution in Eastern Europe, and then, tragically, the Holocaust around World War II.
A horrific realization for many Jews that without their own country,
they faced existential threats. Truly existential. And this created extreme, escalating tensions with the Arab population already living there.
Who saw their own claims to the land being undermined.
Naturally. They felt their future was being decided by outside powers.
So post-World War II, Britain, just grappling with the escalating violence, steps back.
They hand the problem over to the newly formed United Nations.
And the UN proposes a partition plan in 1947, create 2 separate states, one Jewish, one Arab.
But the Arab side found the proposed borders completely unacceptable.
Why specifically?
Well, the plan allocated a significant portion of the land, arguably the more fertile parts too, to the Jewish side. Despite the Arab population being larger at the time, it felt deeply unfair.
So that rejection led directly to May 14th, 1948.
It did. Israel declared its independence.
That is almost immediately.
That alliance of 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, declared war. The first Arab-Israeli war.
And despite being outnumbered, Israel ultimately prevailed.
They did, which led to Palestine losing even more territory than the original UN partition plan had suggested.
A foundational trauma for the Palestinians. the Nakba.
The Nakba, or catastrophe, exactly. Hundreds of thousands were displaced.
And that initial conflict was just the beginning, wasn't it? It set the stage for more wars.
A whole series of Arab-Israeli wars that would fundamentally reshape the regional map and the power dynamics.
Like 1956, the Suez Crisis.
Right. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital global shipping lane.
Huge deal.
Massive. So Israel, along with Britain and France, launched a military operation.
They had military success,
But intense international pressure, especially from the U.S., forced them to withdraw. It ended up being a major political win for Egypt's leader, Nasser, and kind of a blow to the old colonial powers.
Okay, then the 1967 Six-Day War. That sounds decisive.
Oh, it was decisive and truly transformative. A preemptive strike by Israel on Arab air bases.
Crippled them from the start.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It allowed Israel to swiftly occupy huge territories. The West Bank, Gaza, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria.
And East Jerusalem.
And East Jerusalem, including the Old City. A moment of immense historical and religious significance for Israel.
So this victory wasn't just military.
No, not at all. It fundamentally reshaped Israel's strategic thinking. Moved it from just survival to a more, let's say, assertive regional posture.
Right.
Established a kind of deterrence.
A deterrence that still defines things today.
Very much so.
Then, 1973.
The Yom Kippur War. Yes, a surprise attack launched by Egypt and Syria on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in Judaism.
Israel was caught off guard.
Critically so, initially. But with crucial support, particularly from the U.S. airlift, they managed to counterattack.
How did it end?
More or less a stalemate. Territories largely unchanged at the end of the fighting. But the big consequence, the one that hit globally.
The oil shock.
Exactly, the first oil shock. Arab oil-producing nations used oil as a weapon for the first time, embargoing countries that supported Israel.
Revealed their growing global influence.
And plunged the world into a major energy crisis and recession. Big impact.
So stepping back, that 73 war seems like another turning point.
A very significant one. It was pretty much the end of those large-scale, multi-state Arab-Israeli wars.
And Egypt.
Egypt, which had been the leading Arab adversary, actually signed a peace treaty with Israel just a few years later, brokered by the U.S. at Camp David.
That must have fractured the Arab world's stance.
Completely. It broke that united Arab front against Israel, fundamentally altered the region's alliances.
So connecting this long history to today, how did it reshape the geopolitical chessboard?
Well, the main conflict shifted, didn't it? From that broad Arab versus Jewish, state versus state struggle.
To more of an internal one, Israel versus Palestinian groups.
Primarily, yes. Though state tensions remain, the focus shifted. And at the same time, you saw the rise of the wealthy Gulf Arab states.
Fueled by oil money.
Exactly. Deepening their ties with the U.S. And crucially, they started to see threats closer to home, like Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and eventually Iran as much more pressing than the conflict with Israel.
Even Jordan, once a key combatant.
Forged peace with Israel. Developed a military partnership with the U.S. Became a key U.S. ally.
It's remarkable how most Arab states now, at the government level at least, effectively coexist with Israel.
They do, even if public sentiment often remains very critical, especially regarding the Palestinians.
And this widespread shift, this sort of uneasy coexistence, it sets the stage for the unique role of our next player, Iran.
The outlier.
Right, Iran. It stands as really the singular exception in the Middle East today, the only country that remains explicitly opposed to Israel at a state level.
And here's the twist you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the surprising part, it wasn't always this way. Before 1979, Iran and Israel actually had a remarkably friendly relationship.
Seems hard to imagine now, doesn't it?
It really does.
Now, Iran shares a lot with its Arab neighbors. It's Middle Eastern, majority Muslim.
But there are key differences.
Crucial differences. The majority of Iranians are Persian, not Arab. Different language, culture, distinct historical roots.
And religiously.
Primarily Shia Muslim. A significant minority branch within Islam, setting it apart from the predominantly Sunni Arab world.
And like many neighbors, huge oil reserves in the Persian Gulf.
Which has always been a major factor in its international relations, yes.
So before the revolution in '79, Iran was a monarchy led by the Shah.
Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah.
After World War II, he pushed for rapid modernization, strongly backed by the U.S. and U.K.
Very strongly backed by them. But here's where the seeds of, well, deep discontent were sown.
How so?
Oil was the main industry, Iran's lifeblood. But most of the profits flowed to Western companies, BP especially. Very little reached the Iranian people, except for a privileged elite around the Shah.
That sounds like a recipe for resentment.
It absolutely was, and it raises that classic question. What happens when a nation feels its resources are being exploited, its sovereignty undermined?
Did anyone try to change it?
Yes. In 1951, the democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, took a huge, bold step. He nationalized Iran's oil industry.
Nationalized it, took it back.
Exactly, to benefit Iranians. But this was unacceptable to the West.
And what happened?
Well, what's now publicly confirmed, even admitted by the U.S. government through declassified documents,
The CIA documents.
is that the U.S. and U.K. orchestrated a coup in 1953. They overthrew Mossadegh, restored the Shah to absolute power, and ensured Western control over Iran's oil resumed.
Wow. That intervention must have had long-lasting consequences.
Immense. It destroyed Iran's brief democratic experiment and installed an autocrat deeply beholden to Western interests.
So the Shah, back in absolute power, backed by the U.S.
He ramped up his autocratic rule, pushed through reforms known as the White Revolution.
White Revolution?
Yeah, a series of top-down modernizations aimed at rapidly transforming Iran, partly, frankly, to preempt communism by improving conditions, or appearing to.
What kind of reforms?
Things like land redistribution, giving women the right to vote, expanding education, very westernizing policies on the surface.
And with oil money booming.
The country industrialized rapidly. Iran became a major regional power by the 1970s, a key pillar of U.S. strategy in the region.
And during this time, Israel actually supported the Shah.
They did. They saw his regime as a useful counterweight to the Arab states they were often in conflict with. Shared intelligence, military cooperation, it reinforced those friendly ties.
But beneath the surface.
Beneath the surface, this rapid westernization, the modernization, combined with the Shah's increasingly brutal authoritarianism. It was deeply unsettling to traditional Islamic communities.
Plus the economic issues.
Yes, growing economic disparities, the perception that the elite were just hoarding the oil wealth while many suffered. Popular discontent just simmered and grew. It created fertile ground for revolution.
And this all came to a head in 1978.
Yes, the beginning of the Iranian Islamic Revolution.
The central figure being Ayatollah Khomeini.
Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a prominent Shia religious leader who'd actually been exiled by the Shah 15 years earlier.
What was his message?
He fiercely criticized the Shah's dictatorship, the corruption, the westernization. He advocated for governance based on Islamic law, Sharia, and crucially, rejecting foreign influence, especially American influence.
And people listened.
Massively. By 1978, anti-government protests just exploded nationwide. Huge strikes, massive demonstrations.
Even the military.
Even the military, the Shah's key pillar of support, began to waver, to abandon him.
So in January 1979,
The Shah fled the country, never returned.
and a month later,
Khomeini returned from exile in Paris to our rapturous welcome. The monarchy collapsed, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born, with Khomeini as its first supreme leader.
a complete transformation.
Absolutely seismic for the region and the world.
And the new regime was instantly anti-American.
Vehemently. Which led, of course, to the infamous U.S. Embassy hostage crisis starting in November 1979.
Where American diplomats and staff were held for.
Over a year, 444 days. It completely shattered U.S.-Iran relations, led to the diplomatic break, economic sanctions, a state of hostility that basically continues to this day.
And alongside the U.S., the new Iranian government also broke ties with Israel.
Immediately. They saw Israel as an enemy of Islam, partly because of its close alliance with the Shah's regime they'd just overthrown, and also because of its strong ties to the United States, the Great Satan, as Khomeini called it.
So a complete reversal of that earlier friendly relationship.
Total 180.
But here's another one of those unexpected twists you mentioned. The new Iranian government's first major enemy wasn't the U.S. or Israel.
No, surprisingly, it was its neighbor, Iraq.
Iraq. Why?
In September 1980, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran, started the brutal, bloody Iran-Iraq War.
What prompted that?
Well, Saddam Hussein feared the spread of Iran's Shia revolution. Iraq had a Sunni-dominated government ruling over a Shia-majority population. He saw revolutionary Iran as a direct threat, plus territorial disputes.
And how did other countries react?
Many neighboring countries, especially the Sunni Gulf states, were also terrified of Iran's revolution spreading. So they, along with the U.S., largely supported Iraq in the war.
Further isolating Iran.
Absolutely. It's even worth noting, kind of ironically, that during this war, Israel actually launched attacks against Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq.
Israel attacked Iraq.
Yes, notably bombing the Osirak nuclear reactor in 1981. They saw Saddam's Iraq as the more immediate threat at that particular moment. Strange bedfellows sometimes.
The Middle East is complicated.
Understatement of the century. The Iran-Iraq War itself was just devastating, lasted 8 years.
Over 1 million lives lost.
At least. Possibly more. Just horrific trench warfare, chemical weapons used, a real tragedy.
And this period of intense isolation during the war, it led Iran's leaders to forge a new strategy.
It did. It's a kind of asymmetrical strategy to counter the U.S., Israel, and the hostile Arab states that had backed Iraq, and also to pursue their vision of rebuilding an ideal Islamic world.
They started interfering elsewhere.
They began to interfere in other nations' civil wars, and crucially, to foster local armed resistance groups who share their anti-Western, anti-Israel ideology.
And over decades, this strategy led to the creation of what's now called the Axis of Resistance.
Exactly. A powerful network of allies and proxies that project Iran's influence across the region.
We're talking about groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Hezbollah in Lebanon, probably the most successful example. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, various Shia armed groups in Iraq. The Assad regime in Syria became a key state ally, and the Houthi movement in Yemen.
And groups like Hezbollah and Hamas, they grew quite powerful.
Immensely powerful. They effectively became mini-states in some ways, with their own political wings, social services, and importantly, significant military capabilities, often operating outside the full control of the national governments in Lebanon or Palestine.
And their primary stated goal
is resistance against Israel. This has tragically led to escalating and horrific cycles of conflict. Israel targeting these groups across borders in Lebanon, Syria, even Iraq.
And these groups responding with rocket attacks into Israel, cross-border raids, other forms of violence.
Exactly. And this pervasive support from Iran for these groups, combined with the ongoing tensions around Iran's nuclear development program.
Which Israel sees as an existential threat.
Absolutely. All of this has pushed Iran and Israel closer and closer to the brink of direct, full-scale conflict, a shadow war that occasionally bursts into the open.
It's an incredibly complex web, isn't it? Historical grievances, shifting alliances, unintended consequences just layered on top of each other.
It really is.
If we take that larger view again, it seems the region's main conflict axis really did shift dramatically, from Arab states versus Israel.
After the World Wars and those early Arab-Israeli conflicts,
to Iran emerging as the new central player, defining the current geopolitical fault lines.
That seems like a fair assessment of the major shift over the last, say, 40 years.
So stepping back again, what's the bigger picture now? It looks like the U.S. and Israel, often with support from many Arab governments.
Tacit or sometimes explicit support, yes.
They seem to be aiming to establish a new regional order.
It appears that way. This has involved targeting regimes they saw as hostile or destabilizing, Saddam Hussein's, for example, targeting various armed groups sympathetic to Iran, supporting opposition to the Assad regime in Syria.
And now it looks like the long-term goal, maybe a 40-year ambition for both the U.S. and Israel,
seems to be dismantling Iran's revolutionary government itself. Though how to achieve that goal, or even if it's achievable or wise, is still very much debated internally within their policy circles.
And the position of the other Middle Eastern countries in all this is just incredibly complex.
Absolutely.
For so long after World War I, the region was dominated, manipulated by Western powers.
Sure.
But the Gulf Arab states, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they've gained immense wealth from oil. And by strengthening ties with the West, particularly the U.S., they've largely taken control of their own oil interests now.
They have more agency than they used to, certainly.
And crucially, as we said, they've come to see Iran, and maybe historically Iraq too, as more immediate, more destabilizing threats to their own stability than Israel.
That calculation has definitely shifted for many Gulf regimes. National interest, regime survival, often trumps historical solidarity, at least at the state level.
However, and this seems really important, despite these state-level alliances, this pragmatic coexistence,
there's still deep popular resentment across the Arab and broader Muslim world.
Fueled
by Western and Israeli actions. Things like perceived disregard for sovereignty, military interventions, and especially what's viewed by many as inhumane repression, particularly the situation in Gaza.
And this simmering anger.
It acts as kindling, doesn't it? It threatens to ignite new conflicts, destabilize those very state-level arrangements, and complicate any top-down attempts to impose a regional order. Public opinion still matters.
Which raises a really important, maybe provocative question. If the current Iranian government were somehow to collapse, would that actually bring peace and stability?
That's the million-dollar question, is it?
Because we've seen in places like Iraq after Saddam, or Syria during the Civil War, or Libya, when established, albeit often brutal, regimes were toppled.
The result was often chaos. Power vacuums, humanitarian crises, state collapse, and the emergence of new, sometimes even more extremist groups like ISIS.
It's a powerful cautionary lesson to consider, right? Sometimes the alternative to a problematic regime can be even more unpredictable, even worse.
Indeed. And this prevailing perception in the region, maybe globally too, that military strength is the only way to ensure survival. That it's a law of the jungle out there.
It risks pushing everyone towards greater instability.
It really does. It fuels arms races, proxy wars, deep distrust. So the ultimate question we're left wrestling with is whether the current grand strategies, often focused on imposing order through force or containment, are truly leading towards a genuinely peaceful and stable outcome.
Or just setting the stage for the next, perhaps even more complex, round of conflicts.
That's the uncertainty we live with.
Wow. What a journey through history, shifting alliances, and these incredibly deep-seated tensions. We really trust this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a truly fresh perspective on a region that's not just complex, but fundamentally important to global stability.
And remember, knowledge, especially when it's truly understood and applied, looking at these different angles, it's incredibly powerful. Keep asking those critical questions.
Keep digging deeper.
Keep looking for that deeper context, and continue to explore multiple, often conflicting perspectives. Don't accept the simple narratives.
It is a lot to consider, and we really hope this deep dive is giving you a clearer lens to view it through. As you reflect on all this, maybe think about this question. What historical precedents or maybe unintended consequences from this specific story, this deep dive into Iran and Israel, might apply to other regions of the world where tensions are simmering right now?
That's a good thought.
And how might thinking about that shape your own understanding of global events unfolding today? Thank you so much for joining us on the Deep Dive. We always